Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Hey gang, hope you enjoy this scary Halloween and fall story compilation. If you have a true scary Halloween story that you've never shared and would like to hear narrated on this channel and podcast, email it to Uncle Josh, truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all, and I'm putting together this year's Halloween extravaganza and hope to hear from you. Now, sit back, enjoy the stories. When I was fresh out of college, I decided after not getting any traction finding work in my hometown, I threw caution to the wind and decided to take a job in Lincoln, Nebraska. It doesn't matter what I did, but I will say it involved accounting. And that's neither here nor there. I'm originally from Yonkers, so this was a very different way of looking at life. I'd never been to the Midwest, so there was a lot to learn, but I really liked it there. Still, I was a shy person. Everyone at my office was really great and supportive, and it always asked me to go out to happy hours and dinners and obviously football games. The problem was most of the females had boyfriends or were married, so I was struggling in that section of my life. That Halloween, at the last minute, I was invited to a costume party. There was a coworker throwing it who felt bad about asking me to come at such a late time, but I was excited to go just the same, even though I had to scramble to get a costume together. I did have a brown leather jacket and a brown fedora, so I figured I'd just go as Indiana Jones. I know, pretty cheesy. When I got to the party, there were a lot of people there that I recognized, but also a ton of people I did not. There was one girl that I'll call Kelly for this story. She was dressed up as what I thought was supposed to be a vampire. Heavy white makeup, tons of lipstick, and an extremely tight leather outfit. She was very sexy and also seemed a little shy like me. My friend introduced me to her, and Kelly and I sat on a couch having a drink and just were awkwardly chatting. By the end of the night, we were talking more and decided to get together the next weekend for dinner and a concert she had tickets for. I forget the name of the band. We met at a restaurant, and I was taken aback. Kelly wasn't wearing a costume at that party. That's the way she looked all the time. She was totally into the goth thing and played the part unbelievably strong. Dark clothes, high boots, and that makeup. To be honest, I didn't care because I really liked her and I kept telling myself to keep an open mind. I mean, I had lots of friends back in New York that were goth, but I was just kind of taken aback to see someone like her in the middle of the country. I'll skip a lot of the nonsense, but that's enough of backstory for now. Kelly and I forged a relationship, and I was really into her. She introduced me to a lot of music I had never heard before, and we would go out clubbing and spend a lot of time at her place. I was more of the button-down type, so again it was completely different for me. I mean, it was exciting. That was until a woman named Jill came into the picture. Jill was an on-and-off friend of Kelly's and also had a pretty serious drug problem, and this is where the scary stuff started. The first night I met Jill, we were at this underground rave, and I'm not going to lie, Kelly also introduced me to ecstasy that night. We were dancing and having a great time with a lot of the goth folks looking at me in my khakis and button-down shirt, but everyone was really nice. Except for Jill. I didn't know it at the time, but Jill had a thing for Kelly. She showed how jealous she was that night by continually interrupting us dancing. She poured a drink down the front of my shirt, causing me to go to the bathroom to get cleaned up, and other little underhanded things to get between us. When I did come back from the bathroom when she dumped the drink on me, the two were fighting, and I didn't get involved, other than to just grab Kelly and say, "Let's get out of here." Jill stood there screaming and causing a scene. So here I am, high on E, and this woman I consider my girlfriend is with another woman freaking out. Jill picked up a beer bottle and smashed it and screamed that she was going to kill us. I mean, everyone at the rave stopped what they were doing. They were just watching her going crazy. Jill took the broken beer bottle, slashed her right forearm, right through the shirt she was wearing, and blood started to flow. She then smashed what was left on her head and rushed past us, pushing Kelly to the floor. Of course, security, which was pretty lax, it was an underground rave after all. They weren't like the cops or anything. Just a couple of big guys. I'm sure they just paid him a few bucks to watch over things. I mean, they couldn't even react fast enough as Jill left a trail of blood from the dance place all the way up some stairs and then out onto the street. I told Kelly we really needed to go. The effects of the E was wearing off, and I just wanted to get out of there. Kelly's phone immediately started blowing up with texts from Jill saying all kinds of crazy things. 1 minute it was, "I love you," repeated over and over and over. And then suddenly there was a text that would say, "I wish you were dead." And that one really got me freaked. She said we'd both be happier if we were dead, meaning her and Kelly, not me. I said we should call the police and let them know what was going on, but that would have blown the lid on the underground party scene I was enjoying, and other than Jill needing help, there wasn't really much we could do. Kelly just turned her phone off and we went back to her place. We calmed down, and that was the first night we made love. On a funny note, I look back at that night, and after we had been together, I went to the bathroom, and I had so much white makeup and red lipstick on my face, I looked like a deranged clown. I wish that's where the story ended, but of course it's not. We decided to watch a movie and fall asleep together, and suddenly there was a pounding on the door. Kelly lived in an apartment that was kind of like a little small house behind her landlord's house. At first we thought maybe it was the landlord and there was something wrong, but Kelly went to the window to look out onto the small porch of her cottage, and standing there was Jill. Jill started yelling, saying she was going to kill herself, and Kelly told her that she needed to get some help. She saw the blood still on her arm, but she was also too afraid to let her in her place. I agreed with that and mentioned that we probably should call the cops now. Kelly said, "Please don't, let's just let her leave." But that didn't happen. Jill became quiet, and both of us looked at one another and waited to see if she would leave. She did not. Jill smashed her hand through the front window where Kelly was standing, causing even more damage to her arm that she'd already done. Kelly screamed and backed up, and I walked forward just in my boxers to see Jill scrabbling at the broken bits of glass still in the window. I mean, just tearing her hands apart. She was screaming over and over at that point, saying all kinds of more crazy stuff about how she was going to kill us both and then kill herself. She said that she and Kelly were going to hell, and I was going to heaven because I was a good boy and they were bad. At that point, I yelled at Kelly and said, "Call the cops." It was loud enough over Jill screaming, so she stopped and started to back up, and I watched Jill stumble down the little driveway between the landlord's house and Kelly's cottage. Kelly finally called the cops and said that they were coming out. I was just guarding the door to make sure if Jill came back she couldn't get in. Kelly also tried calling her landlord, but he didn't answer the phone, and we figured he just wasn't home. We still wanted to make sure the police knew what was going on, so when he saw the broken window, he didn't think it was us. Everything became dead quiet outside. It was that time of fall right before winter where it just seems like everything is much quieter than it is in the summer. Like an idiot, I decided to go outside to see if Jill was still around. Kelly begged me to stay at her place, but I told her to just lock the door and I would be right back. As quiet as I could, still in my boxers, it was freezing. I walked down the little driveway in darkness. I didn't hear anything, and I couldn't really see too much except the streetlight out in the front. But before I got to the front of the landlord's house, I felt a massive pain in my side. In the darkness, in some bushes, was Jill standing with a knife. She had stabbed me. It felt so odd, and I was so full of adrenaline at that point that I didn't really feel much pain. I kind of looked down and put my hand on the blade before I could actually respond and say anything. Jill took the knife out of my side and said, "I'm wrong. I'm staying here. You're going to hell." She raised up the knife again for another shot at me, but thankfully my brain kicked in and I backed up. But then, not using my brain, I ran back to the cottage, which I'm sure just made the blood loss even worse, which by this time had covered my entire side and stained a good portion of my boxers. I burst into the house after Kelly unlocked the door, and she shrieked out loud. I slammed the door shut and told her to call 911 again and let them know what just happened. She did, and the person on the phone told her that they were sending someone and they would also send an ambulance. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my waist. By this time, Jill was back at the door, and for the life of me, to this day, I can't figure out why she didn't come through the broken window. She went back to the door. I'm pretty sure whatever drug she was on that night had her completely discombobulated. She kept screaming, now threatening at me, and not even talking about Kelly, except for one time I remember how she said that how much of a bitch she was and how much she was actually meant for her. Again, none of it made sense. About 5 minutes later, we heard cars coming, and one come blasting up the driveway, and it came to a halt at the cottage, the lights flooding the front of the house. At this point, we saw Jill run past the window in a feeble attempt to evade the police, and we knew she was well aware that they were now on the scene. She tripped in her attempt to get away and fell on the knife nearly in the same spot where she had stabbed me. And she just laid on the ground screaming in pain and in frustration. The first cop came up to the door while 2 others ran over to Jill. We opened the door, and the first thing he said to me in that Midwestern drawl was, "Son, you look like you ran into a little trouble." It actually made me laugh, which actually hurt me even more because the laughter hurt my side. Long story short, Jill was taken away and was charged with a ton of stuff. It doesn't make sense to go into everything, but she received a 22-year sentence in prison for what she had done to me alone. She also had a ton of drugs on her person, and that made a case that she was a dealer as well as a junkie. Kelly and I stayed together for another year before she moved to California. And the reason that I thought about all of this was I saw you wanted people to send Halloween stories, and that portion of my life started on Halloween night. The funny thing is, I'm now married to Kelly. We had both married, divorced, and were reunited 4 years ago. We're both now in our late 30s. She is an unbelievably successful graphic designer, and we have 2 wonderful children. She's no longer dressing like a goth girl, but still digs the music. And that perverted side of me once in a while asks her to dress up because that's what she looked like when I first fell in love with her. The last creepy thing that happened with all of this, though, is somehow Jill got our address and was sending apology notes. The last one was a poem that really didn't make too much sense. But after I looked at it over and over and over, trying to figure out what she was saying, I realized all of the first letters and the first words of each sentence, looking at it vertically, spelled out something that still scares the shit out of me. We did share it with the prison, but that's the last I've heard of anything. The letters spelled out, "Not kidding, Rich. I'll see you in hell." I hope we never hear or see from Jill again. Something at the Cemetery, submitted by Lily of the Valley. A few years back on Halloween night, my friends and I decided to break away from our normal hitting the local bar and went out on, I guess, what you would call a ghost hunt. I'm from a town outside of Bakersfield, California, and there are a couple of old cemeteries in a town not too far away. We were hanging out at my friend Terry's house, just having a couple of wobbly pops and watching some scary movies. We were all 22 at the time. It was Terry, me, Fitz, and Allison. I suggested we head out to the Tehachapi Cemetery. It's a cemetery on the outskirts of town that is very old with a lot of lore behind it. Sounded like a good idea at the time. Middle of the desert, and a lot of stories with the people who settled California are buried there, and outside of the cemetery as well. I'm not going to go into a history lesson, but people can look up the place. We got into Terry's car, drove out, and then parked in an inconspicuous spot. And then we snuck our way across the highway to the cemetery. We didn't want to park out front. I mean, come on. Halloween night, I'm sure the cops were prowling that area. There's a chain-link fence that runs all the way around the cemetery, so we had to help each other over before we started wandering around and looking at gravestones with the lights from our cell phones. It was terribly quiet, very dark, and honestly, spooky. Allison was really into the whole paranormal thing, but the rest of us were just viewing this as something fun to do. She, on the other hand, was really into trying to communicate with the dead or whatever, Nothing was happening. Some of us were giggling and just having a good time, when Fitz said, "Hey, what the hell is that?" We all looked at him and said, "What are you talking about?" And he pointed to the fence and said, "There's somebody walking around out there. Maybe it's a cop or security." I asked him what they looked like, and he said it looked like a man, but was really big. And the strange thing was, he was walking on all fours, up and down the fence. I said, maybe we should get out of here. But Allison was still doing her paranormal thing, and Terry and the rest of the bunch said it was nothing. Fitz was probably just seeing things because it was Halloween and things were scary. We kept wandering around the cemetery, and then Fitz once again said, "Guys, I'm not kidding. There's something out there." At this point, I looked over to where he was pointing, and I saw what he was talking about. To this day, I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, but it was big. It kind of looked like a dog, and it was shaped like one, but it also looked like a man. When I saw it crawling on all fours going back and forth up and down the fence, I didn't know what to say. The others were still thinking we were making it up, but Fitz and I both said, "No, seriously, there's something out there walking around the fence." Terry said, "You guys aren't funny. I just want to go home now." And I said, "That's fine, let's just get out of here. Let's just go home and hang out." Fitz was also in agreement, but Allison was saying she wanted to keep looking around. And that's when we heard the banging on the chain-link fence. I looked over and saw what I can only describe as a very large man that, again, also looked like a dog, standing with its front arms or paws or whatever on the fence staring at us. I nearly pooped my pants and started to back up. I'm not going to lie. I was really, really scared. This was uber creepy. For a second, I thought maybe it was just a guy in a costume. It made these growling sounds like I've never heard before, and I've had plenty of dogs and cats in my life. Fitz said, "Screw this noise, we need to leave." So I grabbed Allison by the arm and said, "We're going." And here's where the problem actually started. Anytime we would move, this dog, man, creature, whatever it was, would follow us along the fence line. And I'm not talking about how it was before on all fours now, because it was walking on two legs with one arm or paw or whatever on the chain-link fence. If we made a motion to go where we were trying to go to, this thing would walk right along with us. If we returned and walked backwards, it would follow along the fence, staring at us, still growling. Terry started to cry, and I told her to shut up. We were going to be okay. And Fitz said, "Hey, let's split up and hop the fence and run in different directions." But I said that was the craziest thing I had ever heard. And we were stuck. And this is all true. I'm not making any of this shit up. We were all beyond scared and worried that we were not actually going to leave this cemetery with this thing staring at us, growling, and following our every move. We tried to go to the front of the cemetery again, but this thing kept following us. But then suddenly, there was a noise from way out in the desert, and this thing, whatever it was, stopped looking at us, dropped back onto all fours, and then ran away from the cemetery into the desert. Terry said, "We have to leave now," and I agreed with her. We all waited for a few minutes to make sure that this thing wasn't coming back, and then busted out of the cemetery. I couldn't tell you how fast we got back to the car, but it would have made any Olympic sprinter drop their jaw. We floored it out of there and went back to my house, everyone looking like we had just seen a ghost and sweating bullets. I don't have any clue what that thing was out there, or even if it was, I mentioned maybe just a guy in a costume. But the way that it was stalking us every time we walked around was unbelievably scary. The panting and the growling was something that I don't think any human being could replicate. We never told anybody else about our experience, except for Allison, who had a friend who was also into paranormal investigation, and she blabbed to her. Then she wanted us to go back to see what the thing was. I don't think so. Whatever it was, it didn't want us there or wanted to attack us. And I'm never going back to that cemetery, even in broad daylight. Halloween Thing, submitted by Tara and Sam. When I was 12 in 1986, I'm Tara telling this story, by the way, my family moved into my grandmother's house. It was a huge old Victorian with lots of rooms and lots of history. My brother Sam and I were just talking, and I thought I would share this for the campfire crew. Sam was 10 when we moved, and the house was left to us in my grandmother's will. She died in it after slipping out of the bathtub and hitting her head and breaking her neck. It was terribly sad and embarrassing. It could have been prevented. She refused to use a bath mat, saying that they were germ factories. My dad found her the day after it happened. It really sucked. She was a great woman, and we all loved her dearly. I think that's why my dad opted to sell our house and move into the house he grew up in. So many connections. It was also part of the Underground Railroad, too. There were 2 different hiding places in the basement, and one even had a tunnel to another exit in a small barn out back. And that had been sealed off long before I was born. Anyway, the place was haunted. I'm serious. My grandmother was convinced it was haunted by the previous owner and some slaves that came through on their way up north. I will say that Sam and I did hear some weird noises and saw some strange things happen. Plates sliding across the dining room table on their own, doors opening and then slamming shut on their own, and sometimes late at night we could hear whispering with no one else in the room, and lights would turn on and off by themselves. When my grandmother died, it seemed like all of that had stopped when we moved in. We packed all August, moved in September, and when October came around, my brother and I begged my parents to let us have our friends over for a Halloween party. They said okay, and we did all kinds of stuff. Trick-or-treating, bobbing for apples, and then told scary stories until it was time for everyone to go home. School the next day, you know? Well, after my parents went to bed, Sam snuck into my room and had a box in his hands. He told me to be quiet and pulled out 3 candles and some matches from his pocket and then said, "I got a Ouija board." I'd heard all the bad stuff about them, but thought, well, you know what, it's Halloween. Maybe it would be fun to mess around with it anyway. Making sure my parents were asleep down the hall, we lit the candles and then set up the board. I said we should try to contact our grandmother. And we followed the directions and started asking questions of our Grammy, and that's what we called her. At first nothing happened, but then the planchette thing started to move and answer our questions in very simple yes or no fashion. When we asked if we were talking to our Grammy, the planchette would always say yes. But if we asked it questions that we knew our Grammy would know the answer to, things were always kind of murky. Suddenly, the board started to spell out things, and words were misspelled. It said K-I-L-M-I. We asked it what it meant, and it spelled out the same thing again. K-I-L-M-I. I asked, "Are you saying kill me?" And the planchette went to yes. My brother and I looked at each other in horror. What was that supposed to mean? I asked again, "Do you mean someone killed you?" And it said no. And I asked again, "Kill me?" And it said yes. The board was telling us that something wanted me to be killed. I immediately stopped fooling around with the board. I closed everything up, put it back into its box, and told my brother to go to bed and that we were done. He didn't want to hear that, but I told him that this was messed up and I just wanted to go to bed. He finally did, snuck back to his room without waking up my parents, and that was it. However, about a half hour later, after everything had calmed down, I was just sitting in the dark in my bed when my closet door opened all on its own. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. And this dark shadow came out of my closet, and I thought it looked like my Grammy. It moved over to the side of my bed and just stood there. I couldn't make out all of the shapes of it because it was so dark, but it was darker than the darkness of my room. I squeaked out a, "Grammy?" And this shape said in an unbelievably deep voice a sentence that I will have ingrained in my mind for the rest of my life. Don't contact the dead. You are not talking to who you think you are. I was shaking and said, "Do you know my Grammy?" And this dark shape said yes. She is fine. She loves you, but do not try to speak with her. You are disrupting her rest. Then this dark shape went back into the closet, and the door shut on its own. At that point, I lost it and ran into my parents' room and jumped into their bed crying. They chalked it up to me just being scared and being worked up on Halloween, and I never really told them about any of the things that had happened or what I had seen. I just told them that I was afraid. The funny thing is, nothing ever happened in that home after that. All the things that we had noticed before stopped. No more dishes moving, no more doors opening, no more lights turning on and off. All of it was done. My brother got rid of the Ouija board at an AmVets, and I have no idea what that thing was in my room. But I learned my lesson, and I will never play with a Ouija board again. Trapped in My House, submitted by Hammertoe. When I was in high school, I was dating a girl who dumped me right before Halloween. I was devastated. The whole stupid teenage thing. She wanted to be with a different guy, and I was just kicked to the curb. Did I do what I tell other people now, being an older person? No. I sulked like a freaking crybaby. Friends wanted to go out, some wanted to come over. I just stumbled around like a puppy that had been kicked too many times, and I'll admit it, I was being a chump. My parents were going out on Halloween, and I was just going to stay home and hand out candy and sit in my own little depression. The old poor me, the world hates me angst of a dumb teenager. My parents took off for their party, and I started watching Seven and was ready to hand out junk to the neighborhood kids. For some context, my parents are really wealthy. One's a lawyer, and the other is an investment banker, and I grew up on Easy Street for sure. There was no secret around our town about our house and a lot of the stuff that we had. Multiple cars, artwork, shit like that. A newspaper even once did a story on my mom's love of art and her painting hobby. After 9 o'clock or so, the trick-or-treaters stopped coming, so I turned off the lights and started watching YouTube videos in the darkness of my bedroom. That's when I heard the sound of someone opening our front door. At first I thought it was my parents, but they would have come through the garage door if they had just gotten home. I heard whispered voices talking. My bedroom was at the top of the front foyer stairs, and the door was open so I could hear whoever it was, but I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying. Then I thought, maybe it was some friends coming over to cheer me up and tell me I was being a pussy and to get over my ex-girlfriend. But then I heard the soft sounds of footsteps of someone coming up the stairs like they were just creeping along. I crawled under the covers and then pulled them up just a bit to see 2 figures in black hit the landing and stop. I saw a cell phone light come on and heard a voice say, "This way." And they walked down to my dad's study, a little bit farther down the hall. My parents kept most of their valuables and whatever in secure places outside of the house, but my dad always kept a stash of gold and silver bars and coins in his safe at home. He also had some uncut diamonds in there too. After a second, I knew what these people were here for. My parents probably shouldn't have talked so much about their material shit to everyone that stupid newspaper printed. But I would be proven wrong. It had nothing to do with the way that my parents talked. I slowly got out of bed and moved over to my closet, planning on calling 911. I crept in and closed the door, but before I could dial, I heard a male voice say, "Put the fucking phone down now." I froze. Whoever it was standing right outside of my closet door. There was a crack at the bottom, and the voice said, "Slide the phone under the door and you won't get hurt." I kind of recognized the voice, but didn't make a move. I just sat in silence until I heard another voice, a woman's whisper, "What are you doing? Let's go." The other voice said, not whispering, "Shut up, we're here for more and the kid is in the closet." At that point, I said, fuck it, and I called 911 on speakerphone so they could hear it. When they did hear it, they immediately ran downstairs and started messing with the front door. And we had these doorknobs that were tricky to manipulate. You had to push them in and turn them back and forth to get them to work before you could open the door. Crazily at that point, it's when I realized I probably hadn't shut the front door properly. I was on the phone with 911 telling the woman what was going on and gave her my address. And in the background, I could hear the two people fighting over how to open the door. The woman's voice, no longer whispering, said she was going to try the back door, and they started yelling about how they couldn't get out. The 911 woman told me to stay put, but I said, fuck this, and I got up and snuck over to my parents' bathroom and closed and locked the door. I had a terrible feeling that these people would come back up to my bedroom, and I was right. 911 said that help was on the way, and I heard footsteps running up the stairs and the door to my room smash open. The male voice said, "Brian, get your ass out here and open the fucking front door." It was then that I recognized the voice. It was my Uncle Barry. He and my father had had a falling out years ago over some business deal my uncle fucked up, and they hadn't spoken in years. I heard him throwing shit around in my room, and then running down to my parents' room. He kept calling me by my name and would go from being nice to threatening to kill me. My uncle then tried to bash his way into the bathroom I was in, and that's when the police showed up. My Aunt Chrissy, a total skank, was the other person in the house. She started screaming and ran back downstairs, but it was too late. The police were at the door, and for 5 minutes or so my aunt and uncle were just yelling at each other before a policeman busted open the front door. The 911 woman told me to stay where I was, and a few minutes later there was a knock at the door and a guy saying, "Open the door, back up and sit down, kid. So-and-so police department, Officer Thompson." He even gave his badge number. So I got up, opened the door, and went back and sat down like he asked. After a second, he said to follow him, and we went downstairs while calling my parents. They rushed home, and all the while my aunt and uncle were sitting on the curb in front of our house in handcuffs. All they managed to get was some of my mom's jewelry and a few of my dad's Rolexes and tag-hour watches. Uncle Barry had lost job after job, and Aunt Chrissy was a mess that never even got a job, and they decided to rob my parents after hearing they wouldn't be home on Halloween, and figured I'd be out with friends. My uncle had a .22 caliber pistol on him, and I really wonder if he would have hurt me, but who knows. Anyway, when my parents got there, they pressed charges, and I decided to stop being a pussy about breakups from there on out. Stuck in my own house with 2 loose cannons over a fucking broad. Never again. Halloween Night Road Scare, submitted by Lacey145. In 1995, I was going to a Halloween dance at a bar a few towns over from mine. I lived in Ohio at the time, and when I say a few towns over, I'm talking about 20 miles or so of open road on Interstate 90. I was driving there by myself in a hand-me-down Volvo wagon that was anything but reliable. I should also mention, if Uncle Josh doesn't use my name, I'm a female. Flying solo to the dance party at the bar, I was just going to be meeting up with some friends, but none of the people that I knew were going to be there lived where I was. So of course, I'm on my way there on Halloween night. What does the old Volvo do? Just decided to stop. Engine light comes on, and the car starts to shut down. I couldn't turn the wheel, but did so enough to get it off onto the shoulder. As I mentioned, this is 1995. I had no cell phone or anything like that, and I was in the middle of nowhere, halfway between Harpersfield, where I lived, and Concord, where I was going. Nothing but forest on either side of me. It was about 7:30, so it was getting dark quick, and all I could do was cry and hit the 4-way flashers and hope someone stopped. For a half an hour, no one did. I figured I had to risk getting run over in my costume. I was going as the lady from The Quick and the Dead. Now I think I should change the title of my story to that, but I don't want to get you sued. So I took a deep breath, locked the car, and started walking, hoping that the next exit wasn't too far away. After this whole ordeal, I looked on a map and realized that the next exit was way too far for me to walk. After this whole ordeal happened, I went back and looked on a map and realized that the next exit was way too far for me to walk. But at the time I didn't know. I just lit up a cigarette and tried to get myself to stop crying and be more positive that I would get help. For whatever reason, all traffic stopped going both ways on Interstate 90, which is unbelievably rare. If you've never traveled on Interstate 90, it's one of the busiest highways in the country. After a few minutes of walking, I heard a semi-truck hit that really loud braking thing they do. You know, the one that makes the really loud noise? It slowed down a little ahead of me, and I saw an arm come out of the passenger side window. I kept walking over to it, still on the shoulder, but now a little bit in the grass, getting my feet wet. There was a guy leaning out of the cab saying, "Hey, do you need a ride, little lady?" I took a look at him, and in the fading light I could see that this guy looked like he hadn't shaved in about 20 years, and his hair was greasy, and when he smiled at me, he had missing teeth on both top and bottom of his mouth. Right away, red flags went up. And then I heard another voice, presumably from the driver, say, "Hop on in, we'll take you where you need to go." It dawned on me as I stood there looking at them with this creepy guy waving me up to the cab, that they never even asked if that was my Volvo back there. While I was standing and not saying anything, the guy started tapping the door of the semi and saying, "Come on, just get in. We'll take you where you need to go. It'll be fun." Another red flag. It'll be fun? I politely said no thanks. I appreciate you stopping. And I knew if I got into that truck, there was probably no way I was going to get out of there with my life. So I started walking again, and I heard the semi gear up and slowly start crawling along the side of the road to pull up towards me again. I looked back and realized that there was no trailer attached to the truck. Another red flag. If these guys were on a job, then I might have considered it. But this was just some black truck cruising along slowly, with a guy hanging out of the window now saying, "Little lady, don't walk away, we can take you where you need to go." Then I heard the driver let out this really crazy-sounding laugh. I started walking faster, but the truck just kept cruising along with no other traffic to see behind me or on the other side of the interstate. I almost started crying again, now out of fear and not just frustration. That's when the guy said, "Little lady, you don't need to cry. We've got some Kleenex in the cab. Just jump in. We have some beer, too." Again, what the hell? I looked up and saw an overpass not too far in the distance and thought if I could just get there, I could jump off the side of the road, scramble up, and get away from them. I think they sensed what I thought, and the greasy scumbag started to open the door of the cab. At that point, I broke into a full sprint, running for my life, with the guy yelling behind me and the truck starting to speed up. Right before I got to the overpass, I burst off onto the side of the road and started to make my way through the tall grass after jumping over a ditch. I didn't care that my costume was getting all scummed up at this point. I realized they were still at the road. The truck had now stopped, and they were screaming, "Get back here, you little bitch!" and other really nasty things. I pushed my way up the steep embankment and got onto the road and looked off to my left and saw a house with lights on. By this time, the guys realized they were not going to scoop me up, and I heard them blaring the horn as they kept going down the road, and I watched as they drove off towards Concord. I ran as fast as I could to the house, which was another ways away, and when I got there I just hammered on the door until a middle-aged woman opened it and saw me standing there wet and crying. Of course she was nervous, but asked me what happened. I told her everything, and she brought me in really fast and closed the door. Her husband was actually a policeman out working that evening. As I sat there drinking a cup of tea trying to calm down, she got in touch with her husband and then had me call my parents. I did, and my dad told me to sit tight, and they would come and get me, and they would get the car. And that's what happened. My car got towed. My dad asked me if I still wanted to go to the party, and he said he would come and get me if I needed him to, or if I could get a ride home, that would be fine as well. I chose to go to the party even though my costume was not looking awesome. I kind of just needed to blow off some steam and see my friends. My brother had gone back to my car, and my dad took me the rest of the way. We had exchanged numbers with the nice family that took care of me when I needed them to do so most. The party ended up being fun, and I had a crazy story to tell everybody. And when I calmed down and had a drink or two, I realized how dangerous of a situation I had just escaped. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't been right where I was. Oh, the two guys were pulled over south of Sandusky. The police had a few questions for them, but they denied everything, and there was no proof, so they were let go on their way. My message to everyone on Halloween or any other night when traveling: if possible, go with someone else or make sure that your vehicle is in tip-top shape so you don't ever have to go through what I did. Without a doubt, that was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced in my life, and I hope no other woman, or man for that matter, falls prey to those two scumbags. Thrift Store Guys, submitted by Hattie the Best. This happened 2 years ago. I was working at a local thrift store while I was going to college. I'm still there and finishing up school in another year. Can't wait for spring. Around Halloween time, we always have a lot of people coming in looking for costumes and even regular outfits for whatever they're dressing up for. The same goes for the time of year when a local charity holds a disco fundraiser. People come out in droves for stuff that is from the 70s, or at least look like it. So, I'm a female, and it was a Saturday morning and things were pretty slow when a group of 3 guys came in and started looking around. We don't keep tabs on everybody like a lot of other retail places do, and I could tell they were having fun looking at all of the stuff and, quite frankly, a lot of the junk in our store. But they became pretty rowdy at one point, and our store manager had to go over and tell them to enjoy themselves, but try to keep it down. We do have a lot of older clientele, and they are usually the ones who complain the most. If we can head craziness off at the pass, it's a lot less to deal with when crotchety old people make complaints to our higher-ups. I really wish we would have cut them off at the pass right then and there. Anyway, these guys were picking out some older suits that we had, and I'm going to be honest and say I was laughing at some of the things they were saying. One of them was a really funny guy, and while I was straightening things out and moving some inventory around, I caught myself laughing more than once. I know, I'm a bad influence. They finally got everything they needed, some cheesy wigs and oversized suits. Not really sure what they were going for, and when I asked them while checking them out, they just kept laughing and saying they were going as grumpy old men. The really funny guy had found a very loud red plaid jacket, kind of like the one the guy in Animal House wears. They paid up, I said Happy Halloween, and they just laughed and left. That night, a group of my friends and I were going to a haunted catacombs attraction in our town. These things always seem to spring up around Halloween, and they're very popular. I'm sure it's the same in any fairly large town. We actually had like 3 or 4 of them spread out across our county. I hadn't been to one since I went to a very scary one that I actually had to tap out of. I'd heard good things about the one we were going to, so we all were excited. My 2 friends I'll call A and B met me at my apartment for dinner and some drinks. We were going to meet my other friend at the place and were looking for a spooky good time. We weren't dressing up or anything. This was strictly to get scared and then come back to my apartment for more drinks, and a couple of our boyfriends were coming over after they got out of work. I love Halloween, and I really like scary stuff, hence why I'm sending the story into you. I like the fall weather here in the Northeast. I love the decorations. I love carving jack-o'-lanterns and all the stuff that kids are into. I guess I'm still just a big kid even though I'm 21. I don't care. Holidays are awesome, and I love making the most of all of them. My friends got there, and I was whipping up some stir-fry while my friend shared a bottle of wine with dinner before we headed out to the place. I wasn't drinking and was our designated driver, if anyone is wondering. Don't drink and drive, kids. We met our other friend in the parking lot, and there were a lot of people at the place. I was worried that there would be too many, and the scare factor would go down if there were a lot of us inside. But someone who worked there overheard what I said and assured me that people went in spaced out so as to get the full effect of what was going on. We got closer to the entrance of the place, and there was another guy going over the rules. At any point you could tap out and someone would come and get you to take you out of the rooms. I was sure I would be fine, as well as my friends, but you never know, not having been in a place before. Some people were talking about it being very intense, and 2 guys behind us said this was their second time through and that it was pretty scary. We got inside and started to follow the paths around from room to room. Each area had a different theme, and it was pitch black, save for some low lighting to make sure you didn't trip over things. There were lots of weird spaces that you actually had to either squeeze through or crawl over, and people were always jumping out with scare tactics from behind or in front of you. It made it pretty cool. There were lots of screams and lots of jump scares, and we were just enjoying every second of it. The guys that were behind us had told us there was one room that was really freaky, but they didn't tell us where it was. So that upped the creep factor, not knowing what was around the next corner. We got into said room, and it was set up like a surgical room. There were 2 bodies on tables with doctors and nurses dressed up with skull masks and what looked like real surgical kits. Of course, there was tons of fake blood and screams, and I can't tell you what is scarier. Oh wait, yes I can. It's not the chainsaw guy. It's the illusion of a surgical procedure going very wrong or unwanted. That thought creeps me out more than anything else, as I am terrified of going to the doctor and dentist, even though I'm in very good health. That room really unnerved me, and my heart was going as well as my friends' hearts. I know because they told me they were all so disturbed by what we had just seen. The next room was completely dark and pretty quiet. Of course, we were on high alert for something crazy to happen. And that's when I felt someone grab my arm and start dragging me towards the side, away from my friends. Of course, I screamed out and started yelling for A, B, and C, but there were tons of other screams in the room and everything got completely confusing. I'm not going to lie, I did think about tapping out right then because I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't find my friends. I could hear them calling my name as I was calling out to them, but there were so many other people calling out names of their friends and vice versa. It was just super confusing and very scary. But it went too far when I felt a hand clap over my mouth. I knew no one was supposed to touch us like that from the attraction, and I was already worked up, but now I was getting really scared. I started flailing my arms behind me with whoever was holding me by one arm and pulling me backwards while trying to cover my mouth. Whoever it was took his hand away from my mouth but then moved that hand to my chest and then to my crotch. Again, I knew this was not part of the attraction. I started to scream out again and kick and flail my arms, screaming that someone was attacking me. But in the fracas of what was going on in the dark, no one was really paying any attention to me. Suddenly these strobe lights went off, and I could see everyone in the room for a couple of seconds, and they were all moving around with a bunch of actors dressed up like orderlies in their scrubs, with crazy masks and blood and stuff. They were chasing and moving people back towards the surgical area. And that was part of the attraction. But what was happening to me certainly was not. In the strobe light I caught something. The arm of a red plaid jacket. It didn't register right away, but after a minute my brain kicked in and I realized it was one of the guys from the thrift store. The funny one, and I stress the word funny. He certainly wasn't part of the actors, and he was not being funny right now. My fear turned to anger, and I balled up a fist and took a swing behind me underhand, and it did what it needed to do. It caught the guy right in the balls. He yelled out in pain, and someone else grabbed my other arm and started yanking me towards a corner of the room that was dark and still was not lit up by the strobe lights. For whatever reason, I immediately knew it was one of the other guys I saw in the thrift store. Thank God my screams of help were heard by the monitors of the room and my friends. A hand came down on my shoulder, and a voice said, "I'm here to help you. Do you need to leave?" I yelled out, "Yes, someone is touching me, and it's not one of your actors." The big guy, who was in hospital scrubs, said, "Follow me, I'll get you out of here." I took a chance. I yelled again for my friends, hoping they heard me, as I said I was leaving and I was in trouble. The guy who was really nice snuck me out of a secret passageway and into a back area that was well lit. It was crazy to have to talk to someone with this crazy makeup on, but he was seriously helping me and asking me what had happened. I told him that someone had grabbed me and then tried to touch me and cover my mouth. He looked very serious and said, "Please, wait here," and then picked up a walkie-talkie and started talking into it about what was going on. I overheard the staticky reply that someone was on their way, and within seconds there were a bunch of other people in the back area with me. An alarm went off, and it sounded like they were shutting things down, which they were. They asked me to describe the person who was grabbing me, and all I could tell them about was the red plaid jacket. Some people I could overhear were complaining, and others were startled by the lights that started to come on. And for a second I felt bad that I was ruining everyone else's time. But then it kicked in again that I had just been violated by some creep in there, and that he was still somewhere on the grounds of the attraction. That made me start to freak out even more, and the guy who was helping me told me his name was Steve and that I was going to be okay. Thank God there were local law enforcement officials in the parking lot helping out with security, and one came in and started talking to me, and I had to repeat my story. He asked if I was physically hurt, and I said no, but it was scary as hell to be grabbed like that. He nodded his head and took notes, and he got my name and information and said to wait there, and then asked where my friends were. He said he'd do his best with the people of the attraction to find my friends and let them know I was in the back, and they could come and get me. After a little while, my friends did reunite with me, and I had to tell them the entire story all over again and was crying at this point. The cops took another full statement from me and got the names of my friends even though I didn't know why, and I said I just wanted to go home. The people who ran the attraction were checking out everyone as they were escorted out to look for the plaid jacket guy, but they didn't find him. I repeated that I just wanted to go home and have another glass of wine and see my boyfriend. The attraction people were apologizing over and over and got my information too, saying they did want to follow up with me, and if there was anything that they could do, they would. At that point, I just wanted to leave, but was thankful that they were taking what I was saying seriously. I think they ended up shutting the event down for the rest of the night, and I'm sure there were a lot of people out there that were very pissed off about that. To them, I am sorry. We went back to my apartment and the story was over, right? Nope. We were all shaken up and got back to my apartment. It was still a pretty nice night out, albeit a little chilly, and we went out onto my back patio. My boyfriend was already there, and he had a little fire going in our chimenea. We all had a couple of drinks, and I related the story once again. After a little bit, B's boyfriend came over, and he had a couple of pals with them as well. We weren't planning on a huge party, but it kind of turned into a pretty good one. I was trying to relax as best I could, and our back patio sits right on the edge of the parking lot to my building. At one point in the party, maybe an hour later, my boyfriend noticed someone standing on the other side of the fence. It's one of those fences that has the pickets, and they're kind of off-centered so you can see through a little bit. He didn't say anything right away, but I noticed when he got up and went over to the little gate. He yelled out, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" The person on the other side of the fence sort of backed up, and that's when my boyfriend opened the gate. Lo and behold, there was the guy in the plaid jacket with two of his buddies. It doesn't take a genius to know that the red jacket was a dead giveaway. It was the guys from the thrift store I had seen earlier, and certainly the guy who had attacked me in the attraction. I didn't think about it earlier, but when I saw his face after I had gotten up, I knew it was him. I also knew that it was a coincidence that he might have been at the attraction, but this was no coincidence that he was here. These guys had followed us back to my apartment. All of my guy friends immediately got up and went out into the parking lot area, and the guys from the thrift store backed up a little bit, but knew they were busted. My boyfriend is a serious bodybuilder, and the other guys at the party were also into fitness, and they were very well built too. My friend C got her cell phone out and said she was calling the cops, but my boyfriend said, "Wait a minute," when he saw her doing what she was doing. The guys approached the other guys, and my boyfriend said that the guy had a knife out. My guy friends approached the creeps from the thrift store and the catacombs. When they realized they were being confronted by four hulks, the guy in the red plaid jacket started saying some gibberish, and my boyfriend cut him off. He knew they were up to no good, and we all knew what he had tried to do to me in the dark at the haunted house thing. My boyfriend said, "All right, you guys have two choices. You can deal with us, or you can deal with the cops." There was silence as we all listened to see what their response was going to be. There was nothing, and my boyfriend said it again, and one of the other guys said, "Hey man, we don't want any trouble." And my boyfriend said, "Too bad, you've already got trouble." Us girls were kind of crammed in the gate area watching this, and my friend C once again said we needed to just call the police. Her boyfriend waved her off, and all of them started to walk towards the guys. Before those guys knew what was up, my boyfriend and C's boyfriend got in their faces and immediately started to pummel them. There was a lot of shouting and fighting, but the three guys were no match for my boyfriend and his friends. I'm not going to go into all the details, But those guys from the haunted catacombs got their asses handed to them. And even though we were yelling in the melee, none of us called the police. Some neighbors came out when they heard the noise, but by that time the fight was over, and the 3 guys were laying on the ground. My boyfriend saw the knife next to the guy with the plaid jacket and kicked it away from him underneath another car. Plaid jacket guy got on his knees and looked up, and I could see his face was very bloody from being punched more than 1 or 2 times. My boyfriend was breathing heavily and just said, "Get the fuck out of here and don't ever come back." The guys from the thrift store got up and started running through the parking lot to what I only assumed was their car. My boyfriend and friends just watched them run away, and A and B were also yelling at them, and I started talking to my neighbors and told them what had happened earlier. Everyone agreed to not call the police, but would if they came back. My neighbors said they would keep an eye out, and then laughed when they heard how my boyfriend said they had a choice between them and the cops. Of course, this just shook me up more that the guys had followed us home after what had happened, and I started to debate back and forth whether I should call the cops. My friend C said maybe I should go back to work the next day and find out their names based on the purchases they made, but that's when I remembered they paid with cash. We went back to our little party and invited our neighbors over, and 2 of them did come over and hang out with us. We just kept talking about the night's events. I slowly calmed down enough to have a few laughs, but inside I was still freaked out that this guy did what he did to me with the intention of, I'm sure, way more at the haunted catacombs. And then the fact that they had followed us back to my apartment was still keeping me a little uneasy. Nothing else happened that night, and I never did report it to the cops. But the owner of the haunted catacombs did have my name and reached out to me the next day to see if everything was okay, and that the police had stuck around and asked them more questions. They didn't have any record of the guys who were there and who we suspected of doing what they did, but the police suspected that either the guys had been there before, or maybe were past workers and knew a secret way out, as they didn't get busted when everyone else was leaving the attraction. It's been a year, and I am hyper-vigilant about where I go and my surroundings now. Goes to show that just like the ending of your stories, Uncle Josh, it could be anybody or anything, including the guy next door. I just thank my lucky stars that those guys are not my neighbors or the guy next door. I haven't ever seen them again, and I hope that I never do. Trick-or-treating as a kid. Submitted by Anton. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but it happened to me when I was a kid in the suburbs of Chicago. I lived in a decent neighborhood, but there was one house we always called the haunted house. It was at the very end of our street that ended in a dead end. We never saw the people who lived there come out, and it was only like every other month that someone did come over there to cut the grass and stuff in the spring and summer. Sometimes there was a car parked in the driveway, but again, we never really saw anybody around. It was just this old, beat-up house, and we all said that it was haunted. Just silly kid stuff. One year on Halloween, I was out trick-or-treating with my friends, and we hit all the houses in the neighborhood on one side, before coming back towards my house on the other side when we got to the dead end. Everyone in my neighborhood always had their lights on for Halloween, so we knew where we could trick-or-treat, and the houses that didn't want to give any candy out. We weren't punks and didn't do anything stupid to the houses or families that didn't do trick-or-treating. I mean, we were pretty well-behaved kids and just went where we were supposed to go. We said trick-or-treat, please, and thank you. The year that I'm talking about, we were making the turnaround to come back towards my house, and my friend Mark noticed that the light was on the porch of the haunted house. There was one light on in the downstairs, too, and none of us thought this was weird. We were about 10, and this was a period in time where parents didn't walk around with their kids when they went trick-or-treating. I mean, especially in our neighborhood, which was really safe. Times have certainly changed. Mark wanted to go trick-or-treat at the house, but some of my friends were on the fence, as we never saw anyone there, and we found it hard to believe someone was there on Halloween night. But, like kids, we figured, what the heck, another piece of candy. We walked up the cracked concrete driveway to the porch and started daring one another as to who would go first to knock on the door, or just stand there and yell trick-or-treat. We finally got my friend Steve to do it, and he cautiously went up onto the porch and yelled out, "Trick-or-treat!" He was wearing his Superman outfit, which was really just underoos. Yeah, this was a while ago. We were just a little behind him on the stairs, waiting to see what would happen. We were a little bit scared because, after all, this was the haunted house. After a second or two, the door opened fully, and there stood a guy in a white apron that had blood on it. At first we thought it was a good trick rather than a treat. But this guy, and I figured out it was a guy because even though he had a mask on, it was clear that he was also wearing a Batman mask. He didn't say anything, and he didn't open the door. He just lifted up a clear plastic bag with what looked like a dead cat inside. The bag was all smeared with blood, and it was really making us go nuts. Steve screamed out, and the guy lifted the bag that was now dripping blood onto the already bloody apron the guy was wearing. That was enough for us. We all turned and ran, leaving Steve on the porch. He was still standing there screaming before he realized we had taken off, and then quickly turned and jumped down the stairs and started running after us. We skipped a whole bunch of houses from our trick-or-treating, and our yelling and screaming kind of mixed with all the other people yelling trick-or-treat. Some people did look at us, but they figured we were just trying to scare all the other kids as we ran back to my house. We all burst through my front door and started to tell my parents what we had just seen. My dad thought we were trying to play a prank on him and told us to knock it off or we wouldn't be able to continue to trick-or-treat. We all told him that we were serious, and that's when he left and went over to my next-door neighbor and knocked on his door. He talked to that friend who lived there, and a really great guy that our family is still friends with after all these years. They both decided to walk down to the haunted house to see just what the heck was going on, and thinking that we were making up a story. My dad told us to just wait there for him and to not come down until he got back. My dad was a really good man. All of my friends loved him, and we all listened to him when he said the things that he said, so we stayed put. After about 10 minutes, he came back with the guy next door and gave us another look and said, "Trick-or-treating is over for tonight. You can go to the 2 houses across the street, but I want your butts back here in under 5 minutes." We ran across the street, still pretty scared, but again, we did what my dad said. While we were over there, he was calling the police. When everyone got back to my house, we were going to have some candy and watch a scary movie before everyone had to go back to their houses. My dad went out on our porch, and we were all looking out the window when a cop car pulled into our driveway. My dad and the guy next door talked to the police officer, and all of them walked back down to the haunted house. They were gone for a little bit and then came back, and my dad went right to the kitchen to talk to my mom. And while we were trying to hear what he was saying, he realized that and said, "Just go watch your movie." That was the end of it. My dad didn't say anything about it for the rest of the night. We all just decided it was a prank on us and wondered how many other kids in the neighborhood also got dragged into that and got scared. We asked some of them the next day in school, but none of them had gone down to the haunted house like us morons. When we got home from school the next day, we did see a couple of cars in the driveway of the haunted house along with another police car. My dad was just getting home from work and told me to go in and do my homework and sent my 2 friends who were with me home. I asked him what was going on at the haunted house, and he said, "It's none of our business. Go do your homework." We all talked about it like kids talk about things, especially when something strange is happening in your neighborhood. But I didn't bring it up to my dad, as any time that I actually tried to ask him, he just gave me a look and shook his head. It wasn't until a couple of years later, after many times telling me and my friends to stay away from the house, that he told us what he had seen that night on Halloween. When he and our neighbor friend went down there were no lights on in the house and no one answered the door. They figured, yep, we were just telling stories. But when the police officer came and they all went back, no one answered the door, and again, there were no lights on. The next day when the police and some other people came out to check on the house, we found out that the house had been in foreclosure for years and no one lived there. We kind of figured that. There was no immediate family or people that could be identified as having any ties to the house. I mean, basically the house was abandoned, and the bank was sending people out to clear up the overgrown grass and weeds a couple of times in the spring and summer. We never did find out who that person was that we saw on the door, and everyone did believe our story because when the police did get access to the house, they did find a bag full of blood with a dead cat in it. There was no sign of forced entry in the house, and there was no sign of anyone ever having lived there at all. No one knows who that guy was. No one knows how he got in. And no one knew why the power was still on in a house that should have had it shut off a long time ago. It was just a Halloween mystery. Of course, that just fueled our stories about the haunted house, but we all listened to our parents and never went back there. Down the line, somebody else bought the house and fixed it up, and to my knowledge still lives there. To this day, when my friends and I get together or just catch up over the phone, that house always comes up, and the creepy guy and his dead cat is always a topic of conversation. Whoever he was, he scared the hell out of us, and I'm glad he just left it as a Halloween scare. I mean, there's lots of creeps out there. Everyone, be safe and have a happy Halloween. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or the podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Looking for your scary Halloween or fall stories for the annual Halloween extravaganza coming up pretty quick, and so far I've got some pretty intense ones. Hopefully, you'll share yours. Email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. If you would be so kind, please like this video, consider becoming a subscriber to the channel, and share it with your friends. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought of the stories, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Follow me on social media, you know the drill, and if you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and also check out my storefront at tpublic.com. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.